I never thought my story would end up like this. You spend your whole life giving, pouring everything you have into the people you love, and you don't think twice about it. You cook. You clean. You sacrifice. Because that's just what you do. That's what I did. For my husband, until the cancer took him. For my 3 children, who all swore they'd never forget what I gave up for them. For the grandchildren who used to run into my arms like I was the whole world. And maybe that was the problem. Maybe I got too used to being needed. Too used to being useful. I used to think that if I wasn't doing something for someone, I wasn't worth much at all. It was the Tuesday before my birthday. I just finished folding the same dish towels I've had since 1982, soft and worn, just the way I like them. I'd baked a lemon pound cake, the way my eldest likes. I even laid out the floral tablecloth, the one with the faded sunflowers that only comes out for special days. And then I waited. I waited until the sun went down. Until the cake lost its warmth. Until the tea turned bitter in the pot. No one came. Not a call. Not a knock at the door. Not even a message. That's the moment it all shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. Like something inside me just clicked off. Or maybe it clicked on. I can't say which. I stood there in the kitchen, the overhead light buzzing a little, and I looked at that cake. The smell of lemon still hanging in the air, soft and sweet. And I felt like I didn't exist. I know, they're busy. Jobs, kids, life. That's what they always say when I get brave enough to ask why I've been forgotten again. But birthdays? Birthdays used to mean something. Especially in this family. I remember when I was younger, I'd make each of my children a homemade cake shaped like whatever they were into that year. Dinosaurs, guitars, even a spaceship once. I stayed up till 3 a.m. cutting foil into little wings. But now? I got a text 2 days later. Just a, sorry, things got crazy. Love you. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't understand it. But because I did. That was the moment I realized I'd been erased. Not all at once, but slowly, over time. Like a photograph left in the sun, fading until there's barely anything left. It's a strange kind of grief. Not for someone who died, but for the version of yourself you used to be. The one who mattered. I walked back into the kitchen, wrapped the cake in foil, and put it in the fridge. I don't know why. Habit, I guess. Still trying to preserve things that don't want to be preserved. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid there listening to the house. The tick of the clock. The hum of the refrigerator. My own breathing, soft and shallow. And I thought about all the ways I'd bent myself to fit into everyone else's life. How I moved to be closer to them, even when it meant giving up my garden. How I loaned money I didn't really have. How I babysat when I was sick. How I said yes when I wanted to scream no. But they never asked me what I wanted. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. Really looked. My hair was thinning more than I liked. My face had that soft, papery look it gets when you're tired too often. And my eyes. They looked like they'd been waiting for something. But I couldn't remember what. I made tea, chamomile, because it's easy on my stomach, and sat by the window. That's when I noticed it. The birds. There were 3 of them, little finches hopping along the fence. They weren't doing anything special. Just chirping, fluttering, moving with purpose. And I thought, when was the last time I moved with purpose? Not because someone needed me. Not because something was expected. But just for me. I couldn't remember. And that broke me. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped living for myself. I became a background character in my own life. The woman who drops off the casserole. The voice on the phone giving advice. The emergency contact on the school forms. But not a person. Not someone with wants. With dreams. With edges. And that's when it started. The shift. It didn't come like a lightning bolt. It came slowly. Like thawing after a long winter. A warmth creeping back into places I thought had gone numb. I didn't make any grand declarations. I didn't write angry letters or slam any doors. But I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote my name at the top of a list. My list. Not a grocery list. Not a to-do list for the family. A list of things I wanted to do. Simple things. Visit the rose garden 2 towns over. Read the novel I bought 3 Christmases ago but never started. Buy the good jam, not the store brand. Sit in the sun with no purpose. That list felt like a prayer. Like a promise to myself. I didn't tell anyone. It felt sacred. Like saying it out loud might scare it away. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I started saying no. Quietly, kindly, but firmly. No, I can't babysit this weekend. No, I'm not able to help with that move. No, I won't be available at 7 a.m. to let the plumber in. And oh, the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that tells you exactly how people see you. Not as a person. But as a service. It hurt. But it also set me free. Because once you realize the only thing tying you down is the role you were cast in without your consent, you start rewriting the script. And let me tell you, it's not easy. You feel guilty. You wonder if you're being selfish. You question if you're overreacting. But then something beautiful happens. You start hearing your own voice again. Not the one that asks, "What do you need?" The one that asks, "What do I need?" And the answer might surprise you. It surprised me. You want to know what changed? It was a Tuesday. Funny how nothing days become the ones that split your life in two. I'd been sitting in my room after breakfast, oatmeal again, runny, no cinnamon, not even a sprinkle of sugar. Just beige slop in a chipped bowl. I was folding my Afghan again, the green one I crocheted in '92, the one that used to sit across the back of my sofa when I still had a home of my own. My fingers don't work like they used to, but they remember that pattern. And there I was, folding, refolding, because what else was there to do? I was trying to pretend I didn't hear Mrs. Ellis in the hallway again, crying for help like she always does. But this time she wasn't ignored. There were footsteps. A rush. A voice, young, crisp, firm, asking her if she was all right. I leaned closer to the door, and I heard a laugh. Kind. Not mocking. Gentle. And for a moment, I felt a strange tightness in my throat. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was hunger. Hunger for that kind of attention. That kind of humanity. That nurse, I didn't know her name yet, she stayed with Mrs. Ellis. She didn't just call someone else or walk away. She stayed. I remember thinking, how rare. How dangerous, to hope. But something started uncoiling inside me, like an old cat stretching after too many cold winters. A few days later, she found me. Or maybe I found her. I was wheeling myself back from that dreadful group activity, paper flower making, can you imagine? At my age, with arthritic knuckles and a brain that once balanced checkbooks, juggled schedules, fed 5 kids on a tight budget, I was now expected to find joy in gluing tissue paper to pipe cleaners. I had managed to sneak away early. As I turned the corner, she was there, leaning against the wall, sipping coffee from a thermos with painted daisies. I must have looked surprised, because she smiled and said, "You looked like you needed rescuing." Her name was Lila. I didn't ask for her story, but over time she gave me pieces of it anyway. A young nurse with a temper she kept hidden behind dimples and a long braid. She said her grandmother raised her. Said she owed everything to her. That when her grandma died, she'd promised herself she'd never let another old woman feel invisible on her watch. I didn't cry when she told me that. Not then. But I think something inside me cracked. A tiny fracture in the wall I'd built around my heart after my children stopped calling. I started watching the staff more carefully. And not just them, residents, too. Noticed the way Mr. Daniels never let go of his wedding ring, even in his sleep. How Miss Jackie, once the town librarian, still mumbled Dewey Decimal codes when anxious. We were all stories with the last few pages ripped out. But Lila, she started reading mine again. Or maybe helping me write new ones. It was she who first asked, "Why don't you speak up more?" And I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I had no idea how to explain that a voice can vanish long before your breath does. You spend decades making room for others, quieting your own wants so the people you love can thrive. Then one day, they don't need you. Or they say they don't. And your voice, it rusts. Like an old hinge. But she kept nudging. Little things. Asking me what color I liked best, still forest green, if I had a favorite song, Ella Fitzgerald, Cry Me a River, what I missed most, my garden, the scent of tomatoes on my fingers. She remembered the details. Treated them like treasures. And for the first time in a long while, I felt worth remembering. Then came the envelope. No name on the front, just my room number, slipped under the door during dinner. I opened it after lights out, heart thudding like it used to before dances or deliveries. Inside was a copy of a legal document, something my son had filed, quietly, months ago. He'd authorized the facility to sell the last of my land back home. Said it was too much upkeep. Claimed it was for my own good. I stared at the signature. His name, my name. Our bloodline used like ink to strip away what little I had left of my past. That land, that wasn't just acres. It was where I buried my husband. Where I raised my babies. Where I planted lavender in old tires and sang lullabies on porches. They'd promised to keep it in the family. Promised me. And that's when the betrayal stopped being passive. It stopped being absence. It became theft. I didn't sleep that night. My chest burned. I didn't cry, I'd forgotten how. Instead, I sat up in my chair and listened. To the soft hum of the vents. To Mrs. Ellis muttering in her dreams. To the wind clawing the windows. It felt like even the air outside was trying to warn me, wake up. Take your name back. The next morning, I wheeled myself to the front desk, shaking, stubborn, angry. I asked for a copy of the facility policies. I asked for a meeting with the director. I asked for a phone call, not to my son, no, but to a lawyer I remembered from church bulletins long ago. The receptionist blinked at me like she didn't know I could talk. That afternoon, I didn't go to Crafts. Instead, I sat in my room and rewrote my will. The lawyer came in on a Thursday. He wore corduroy, carried a coffee thermos that smelled like hazelnut, and didn't flinch when I told him I wanted everything undone. We sat across from each other in the tiny multipurpose room, the one usually used for birthday cupcakes and bingo nights. He laid out papers, read aloud clauses, and asked questions I hadn't answered in years, questions that mattered. Like what I wanted. What I feared. Who I trusted. By then, the facility had gotten wind of my sudden resurgence. They started looking at me differently. I'd become inconvenient. The quiet lady with the crocheted Afghan wasn't sitting back anymore. I was asking about financials, about staff rotations, about violations. I was noticing. It was like waking up in a house I'd been sleepwalking through, suddenly aware of every creaking floorboard, every shadow that moved when it shouldn't. Lila was the only one who didn't pull away. She came to my room at night sometimes, sat on the floor with her knees tucked to her chest, and asked me questions like she was interviewing a prophet. "What's it like to survive this long and still want more?" she asked once. I told her the truth, it's like being the last candle lit in a room everyone forgot existed. Her eyes went glassy, but she smiled anyway, and whispered, "Then let's make sure they see the light." It wasn't long before my son called. His voice over the phone was syrup thick with guilt and confusion. "Why now, Mom?" he asked, like he was the one who had been blindsided. Like I hadn't sat through years of silence, waiting for him to ask anything of me that wasn't about money or paperwork. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, and I laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. "No," I told him, voice steady, "I'm finally thinking for me." He sputtered, tried to rationalize. Said I was being dramatic. Said the land meant nothing without people on it. I reminded him that his father's ashes were in that soil. That every inch of that land held memories he'd never cared to ask about. That I was still here, and that was enough reason for it to matter. He didn't have an answer. Just a long pause and a click. But it didn't end there. The staff tightened. Subtle things, cold coffee, misplaced mail, longer waits for bathroom help. Retaliation wrapped in protocol. I saw it for what it was. I documented everything. Every delay. Every snide remark disguised as concern. I wrote it down in a little red notebook and sent copies to my lawyer each week. I became a ghost they couldn't ignore. A specter of consequence in their sterile halls. And then came the meeting. A conference room, a long table, vinyl chairs that stuck to the backs of our legs. The director, the nurse manager, my lawyer, and me. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I sat there, spine straight, dressed in the one blouse I refused to let them donate, the blue one with pearl buttons I'd worn to my daughter's graduation. They tried to speak first. Tried to lead. I cut in. "I know who I am," I said, slowly, clearly. "You all forgot, and that's fine. I forgot, too. But I remember now. And I want you to remember this, I will not be erased." I didn't shout. Didn't cry. I declared. And for the first time in that place, I watched them shrink. Not because I was rude. Not because I was angry. But because I was seen, fully, unmistakably present. A person, not a patient. And in that moment, I realized, this wasn't just about me. It's funny, how peace doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it shows up on a quiet Tuesday, in the form of birdsong outside your window and a hot cup of tea someone made without being asked. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, hands wrapped around that chipped mug, and realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies. Not for calls that never came. Not for anyone to explain why they left or why they stopped seeing me as a woman worth listening to. I had started to belong to myself again. The land transfer went through 2 weeks after that final meeting. My name, back where it belonged, inked clean and strong on the deed. I didn't tell my son. I didn't need to. I imagined he found out eventually, maybe through a letter, maybe a notice from the attorney's office. Maybe he stared at it in disbelief, remembering how confidently he thought I'd go to my grave compliant. How wrong he was. I didn't take revenge. I didn't sell the land to spite him, though I could have. I leased a portion to a local community garden program instead. The rest, I left open. Let the wind move through it. Let wildflowers grow where his plans for concrete had once lived. When people asked why, I simply said, because it deserves to breathe. Word got around the facility, too. That I wasn't the soft one anymore. That I asked questions at council meetings, that I spoke up when the food was cold or the aides were stretched too thin. That I sent letters to the board with bullet points and signatures. They tried to keep their distance, but some of them, especially the newer ones, looked at me differently. Like I was a force. Not a relic. And Lila, God bless that girl, kept coming. She started bringing a little radio with her, played Sam Cooke or Nina Simone while she trimmed my nails or combed my hair. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just sat. She'd rest her head against the wall and say, "You remind me of someone I want to become." I never told her, but she reminded me of someone I used to be. One evening, just before dusk, she wheeled me out to the garden. It had rained earlier and the air was thick with that fresh, forgiving smell, dirt and leaves and the faint trace of jasmine. I closed my eyes and let it all soak in. The breeze touched my skin like a memory I didn't know I'd forgotten. For a second, I wasn't old. I wasn't betrayed. I wasn't anyone's mother or wife or problem. I was just a woman under an open sky, whole in a way I hadn't been in decades. I think that's when I understood what freedom really meant. It wasn't about getting back what was taken. It was about remembering I was never theirs to lose. I've started writing again. Little pieces, stories, letters, sometimes just fragments of thoughts. I keep them in a shoebox under my bed. Some are meant for no one but me. Some, maybe, I'll leave for Lila. And maybe, just maybe, one day someone will read them and say, she didn't go quietly. And they'll be right. Because I won't. Not now. Not ever again. I am still here. And I see myself, even if they never did. There's something sacred about waking up and knowing you don't owe anyone your silence. That's the gift age gave me, not the wrinkles or the aches or the things I sometimes forget, but the audacity to be entirely mine. I used to think aging meant shrinking, fading into corners while the younger ones carried the torch. But I see now that aging is not vanishing, it's becoming. Becoming sharper, wiser, unshakable. Like sea glass smoothed by decades of current, still whole, but impossible to break the same way twice. I sit by the window most mornings now, the one that looks out over the east side of the garden, where the rosemary bush is growing wild. Sometimes I imagine planting something of my own again. Tomatoes, maybe. The kind my mother used to grow, deep red and warm when you plucked them from the vine. She used to say, things that grow from your hand taste better, and I didn't understand until now. Because it's not just food that grows better when you tend to it with your own care, your own energy, it's yourself. Your voice. Your worth. I still see them sometimes, you know. My son. My granddaughter. Not in person, but in dreams. Or in strangers' faces on the street. I used to ache when I thought of them. Now it's more like a ghost wind brushing past. I let the pain come when it wants. I sit with it. And then I let it pass. That's the power no one tells you about when you've been wounded deeply. You get to choose how long you let the bleeding define you. The funny thing is, I haven't become bitter. Just clear. I've learned there's a line between grace and erasure, and I no longer confuse kindness with quiet compliance. I still hold doors open. I still smile at babies in the hallway. But I don't flinch when someone crosses my boundaries anymore. I don't apologize for wanting space, or saying no, or simply refusing to make myself small so someone else can feel tall. That version of me, the one who smiled through being overlooked, who lets silence stitch itself into her every sentence, she's gone now. I buried her with lavender and thanks. She got me this far. But I'll walk the rest of the way as the woman I am now. Sometimes the residents come to me. Quietly. At night. With questions they can't ask anyone else. One wanted to know if it was too late to write a letter to her estranged sister. Another asked how I survived my son's betrayal without turning cold. I told her I didn't, not right away. But I did something better. I melted the cold into steel. They think I'm strong. And maybe I am. But more than that, I'm free. And if I have any legacy at all, let it be this, that no woman, no matter her age, her title, or her past, is ever too late to reclaim her voice. That we are not just vessels for memory or service or sacrifice. We are stories still being written, names still worth speaking with reverence. We do not fade, we evolve. And when the world tries to write us off, we write ourselves back in. In bold. Underlined. And never again in silence. I didn't plan the moment. I didn't rehearse a speech. But I felt it coming for days, like a storm you can feel in your bones before the clouds even gather. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my son showed up at the home, unannounced, all puffed up in some attempt at penance, carrying a store-bought bouquet that still smelled like cellophane. I almost laughed. Almost. But I didn't. I simply looked at him and let the weight of every silent year hang between us like wet laundry. He stood there, waiting for me to invite him in. For a flicker of that soft-eyed mother he remembered. But I wasn't her anymore. I had held too many unspoken thoughts behind my teeth to ever play that part again. So I didn't offer him a chair. I didn't reach for the flowers. I just sat still and looked him in the eye with the steadiness of a woman who no longer needed to be liked to feel whole. And then I spoke. You left me there, I said. You made a decision, calculated, cold, and you handed me over like a piece of clutter you didn't have room for. Don't tell me it was hard for you. Don't insult me by pretending this was mercy dressed up as necessity. You didn't even visit. Not for months. Not a phone call. Not even a card on my birthday. He opened his mouth, probably to defend himself, to spin it into some tangled justification about work and stress and family priorities. But I lifted my hand, slow, deliberate, and the words died in his throat. No, I said. You don't get to rewrite this. You don't get to narrate my pain for me. I was there. I lived it. I felt every humiliating day in that place. I counted the hours between meals and the stares of nurses who pitied me because no one ever came. I waited by that hallway window, the one with the broken blind, hoping I'd see your car. And I told myself stories, ridiculous, naive stories, to make it hurt less. He's just busy. He'll come tomorrow. But you didn't. And the silence screamed louder than any apology you could give now. His face changed then, eyes cast down, jaw clenched like a boy caught in a lie. For a moment, I saw the child he once was, the one who scraped his knees and came running for comfort. But I didn't offer him comfort this time. I wasn't here to mother him through his guilt. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and that startled him. I'm something stronger. I'm done waiting. I've stopped measuring my worth by who visits or who forgets. You taught me that, in the end. Not by love, but by lack. And that's a kind of teaching too, I suppose. So no, I don't need your apology. I need your absence to stop echoing like it owns me. That's what this is. I'm closing the echo. There was a silence then, thick and fragile. He blinked like he'd been slapped with softness. I stood, slowly, carefully, and walked past him to the door. I held it open. Just once. My goodbye. He looked at me like he might cry. Like he wanted permission to stay. But I didn't give it. You can leave the flowers on the table, I said, voice calm. But don't mistake them for healing. And then I turned away. After he left, the room was still. Not quiet in the way silence used to ache, but still, as if the air itself was exhaling with me. I didn't cry. I thought I might. I thought that confrontation would tear something open inside me, something tender and leaking. But instead, I felt clean. Not empty. Not full. Just clean, as though I had finally wrung out the last of a soaked sponge I'd been carrying for years. The next morning, I did something small but sacred. I made tea in my favorite chipped cup, the one with the yellow sunflower fading along the rim. I used to save it for special occasions, foolishly waiting for a better day. But I've stopped waiting. I drank it slowly, savoring the warmth as it bloomed across my palms. And as I sat near the window, the one that faces the big oak tree where the birds like to nest, I realized something. I wasn't hoping anymore. I wasn't holding my breath for a visit, or a call, or a sudden burst of regret from someone who had none to give. I was simply breathing for me. I started spending more time with Ruth, the woman 2 doors down who knits hats for premature babies and always smells like cinnamon. We talk about books, and gardens, and sometimes grief, not the kind that seeks rescue, but the kind that nods in understanding. And when we laugh, it's not a brittle sound. It's round and soft and full of life. I've joined the Tuesday art group, even though my hands are shaky and my lines are never straight. I paint, not because I'm good at it, but because color feels like language when words feel too worn out. I painted a field last week, gold and wild, with a sky so blue it felt like memory, and when I looked at it, I didn't see the woman who was left behind. I saw someone who had finally arrived. Someone who had stepped out of her role and into herself. Sometimes I still think about the past. The house I built into a home. The nights I rocked babies with fever and sang lullabies with a cracking voice. The holidays I cooked alone while others sat and watched television. But those thoughts come less like a wound now and more like weather. Passing, changing, never permanent. I've made peace with the echoes. I've learned how to live without chasing the approval of people who only ever saw me as convenient. And strangely, in all that letting go, I've made room. Real room. For new faces, new rituals, and a kind of quiet that doesn't feel like punishment anymore. It feels like sanctuary. I've even started writing little notes to myself and tucking them in drawers. Not because I forget things, but because I want to remember who I am, who I've become. One of them reads, "You are not what they failed to see. You are what you've chosen to become." So if anyone's still listening, if you've ever been discarded, dismissed, made to feel like background noise in a story you helped write, hear me when I say this: you are not invisible. You are not just what you gave. You are what you survived. What you reclaimed. What you dared to be after the world stopped clapping. I may be older now, but for the first time in my life, I'm not just surviving for others. I'm living for me. I suppose the strangest part is how quiet true peace can be. Not triumphant, not blazing with glory. Just steady. Like a soft tide brushing the shore, back and forth, promising no storms. That's what it's been like, since everything changed. Not a grand finale, but a sacred unfolding. Most mornings, I rise with the sun, not because I have to, but because I want to. My body still aches the same, the knees creak, the fingers don't quite straighten, and I still talk to my coffee as if it might respond one day. But now, there is no resentment behind it. There's no one tugging on my time, no demands veiled as love. Just me, and my life, finally mine again. I started walking a bit each day. Down to the rose bushes near the retirement center, where Mrs. Lynn tends to them like they're her children. We wave at each other most mornings, not always talking, but always seeing. That's what matters now, being seen. Even in the small ways. Even just a nod that says, "I know you're here." I volunteer at the library on Thursdays, mostly reshelving books and helping children find stories with dragons and brave little girls. They call me Miss Jean, even though I told them Grandma Jean was fine. One of them, little Cassie, asked me once if I lived in a castle because my hair was silver. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the copy of Charlotte's Web I was holding. Those little moments, they fill something in me that I didn't know had gone so empty. And not because they're loud or flashy. It's the quiet recognition. The way the world turns to me with curiosity and not just need. They ask what I think. They listen when I speak. And for the first time in decades, I don't feel like I need to apologize for taking up space. There's a bench by the lake I visit sometimes in the afternoons. I bring a thermos of tea and that old scarf I knitted back when my husband was alive, the one he never wore, but I kept anyway. I sit and watch the ducks, or read the poetry book I keep hidden in the lining of my bag, because some parts of me still want to be secret. And sometimes, I think about forgiveness. Not theirs. Mine. Because I carried guilt like it was stitched into my skin. Guilt for wanting more. For snapping once in a while. For the nights I cried alone in the laundry room, biting my fist so no one would hear. For letting myself be small so they could feel big. For staying too long. For speaking too late. But lately, I've been gently, one by one, unthreading those stitches. The truth is, I was never just their caretaker, their cook, their keeper of secrets. I was never just the woman who knew where everything was in the house, or the one who remembered everyone's birthdays while no one remembered mine. I am, a woman with stories of her own. I once wanted to be a singer. Did I ever tell you that? I used to hum on the porch in the evenings, when the kids were still at school and I had a moment to myself. Sometimes the neighbors would hear and shout for more, and I'd pretend to be embarrassed, but really, I loved it. The sound of my own voice, not in service to anyone, but just free. Last week, I went to an open mic night. Didn't plan to. Ruth talked me into it. I wore my good blouse, the one with the pearl buttons, and brought a folded napkin with lyrics scribbled on it. I got up there, heart pounding like a bird in a cage, and sang a lullaby I wrote when my youngest was sick with fever years ago. My hands shook. My voice cracked. But when I finished, they clapped. Not out of pity. Not out of politeness. But because they felt it. I cried in the car afterward. Not because I was sad. But because for the first time in forever, I had given something of myself without it being taken. There's a difference, you know, giving freely, and being emptied. One heals you. The other hollows you. So I've started singing more. At the market. In the garden. Sometimes in the bath, even though my cat gives me a look of judgment that would shame the Pope. I don't care. My voice belongs to me now. My time. My heart. My name. They still call sometimes. The ones who left me in that place, who looked at me like a burden instead of the woman who fed them with love and her own breath. They call with short words and long silences, hoping I'll smooth it all over with grandmotherly grace. I don't. I speak gently, but I speak clearly. I answer when I choose. And when I don't, I feel no guilt. Because love, real love, cannot be guilt into existence. And I am not lonely. That surprises people, I think. They assume a woman like me, older and alone, must be aching for company. But I've learned that solitude isn't the same as isolation. My solitude is full, of art, of music, of friendships that feel like soft blankets on cold nights. I eat what I like. I read what I want. I laugh at my own jokes and cry when the wind makes the trees sway like dancers. I am whole, even in my quiet. The best part? I like who I am now. Not just love, like. There's peace in that, you know? In looking in the mirror and not wincing. In remembering that every wrinkle came from feeling too much, loving too deeply, staying too long, and surviving anyway. So here's what I'll say, if you've stayed with me this long, it's never too late. Not for reclaiming your story. Not for stepping back into the light. You don't have to wait for someone to hand you permission to live. Sometimes, you have to hand it to yourself. And when you do, when you finally stop shrinking and start expanding, you'll find others like you, women with weathered hands and soft eyes, who've been waiting for someone else to go first. Go first. Show them. Show yourself. I promise, peace is waiting. And it is sweet. They didn't see me when I walked back into that house for the first time in months. I moved through it like a ghost, quiet and careful, as if I could still disturb the delicate balance of resentment they had built in my absence. The walls were the same dull cream they had always been, the pictures still crooked, dust gathering in corners they never noticed. It smelled faintly of microwave dinners and lavender spray. They never cleaned the way I used to. They never cared about corners. I stood by the staircase for a long time, staring at the chipped banister I had polished 100 times, my hand hovering over it like a woman reaching for the hand of a ghost. This was my home. I built it with my hands and held it together with my silence. And now it was theirs, rearranged, redefined, and scrubbed of my presence. I wasn't supposed to come. The lawyer advised against it. Said there was no legal reason for me to visit. No necessity. But my heart wouldn't rest. Something inside me said I needed to return, not for them, but for me. Not to reclaim, not even to confront, but to see. To see who I used to be here, and what pieces of her still lingered in the air like perfume that outlasts the wearer. They weren't home when I arrived. Just as well. I wasn't ready to see their faces, the polite confusion, the subtle grimace that's barely hidden when they think they're being kind. I knew it too well. It's a look that says, "Why is she still here?" I moved from room to room, trailing my fingers across furniture I bought, curtains I sewed by hand, frames filled with memories I wasn't in. They'd taken down most of the photos of me. Replaced them with images of their children, vacations I was never invited to, graduations I only heard about through secondhand mentions. As though I had died and they were erasing me gently, inch by inch, so the guilt didn't sting too sharply. But I was alive. I was very much alive. And now I had eyes not just to see, but to witness. In the kitchen, I found the drawer where I used to keep my special teas. Empty. They'd gutted it, probably replaced it with protein bars or gadget cords. My hand gripped the edge of the counter, tight. Not because of the tea. Because of what it meant. That even the smallest rituals of mine were now gone, like they never mattered, like I never mattered. And then I found it. The shoebox. Tucked high on the top shelf in the linen closet, just out of reach unless you knew exactly where to look. I dragged the step stool across the floor like a soldier shifting into position and climbed up with a slow, deliberate steadiness. The box was still there. Untouched. Inside it, my letters. Dozens of them. Birthday cards I had written and never sent because I was told it would be too much. Apologies I drafted when I felt I had overstepped by offering advice. Notes I wrote late at night, tears smudging the ink, to my daughter, to my grandchildren, to anyone who might have wondered if I still thought of them. They never read them. Because I never gave them. I carried the box to the living room, set it down on the coffee table like a sacred offering, and sat. My hands shook as I opened the first envelope, one addressed to my youngest granddaughter. I had written it after her 6th birthday. They hadn't let me come that year. Said it would stress her out, having so many guests. But I had baked a cake anyway. Chocolate with mint icing, her favorite. I left it on the porch with a note tucked beneath the foil. They never mentioned it. Not once. Reading the letter felt like opening a wound I had stitched shut with nothing but willpower. My words were tender, warm, aching with a desire to be seen. To be let in. I had folded myself so small inside those pages, hoping she'd hear me across time. I read one after another, tears falling freely now, not from sadness, but from release. These were the parts of me they never got to know. The parts they dismissed because they didn't fit the version of me they preferred, silent, available, grateful. But now I had seen them again. I had seen me. The front door creaked. Voices filtered in. Laughter. My daughter's laugh, sharp and forced, and the rustling sound of grocery bags. My son-in-law's deep voice, half bored, half harried. I stayed seated. Let them find me. Let them feel the unease of my presence like a mirror held too close. She froze when she saw me. Her keys clattered to the floor. Mom? I nodded once. Didn't rise. Didn't smile. What are you doing here? She asked, already flustered, already preparing to reclaim her ground. I came for my letters. She looked at the box. Her mouth tightened. You know you're not supposed to. I know. I interrupted her, my voice calm, almost kind. And I came anyway. My son-in-law hovered awkwardly in the doorway. He had always been the type to disappear into wallpaper when things got emotional. Fine by me. I don't think this is appropriate, she continued, her voice rising. We've moved on. You chose to leave. No, I said, and this time I stood. I chose to live. There's a difference. Her mouth opened and shut like she wanted to argue but had run out of air. I didn't come to fight. Or to stay. I came to retrieve what's mine. My words. My memories. My truth. She looked down at the letters, perhaps seeing them for the first time as something more than paper. Maybe something dangerous. I won't be erased, I said softly. You can pretend I don't exist in your stories, but I exist in mine. And they are just as real. The silence stretched long between us, taut as a violin string. I hope, I said, turning toward the door, that one day you'll find the courage to read what I wrote. Not because I want you to hurt. But because I want you to know who I was, before you decided who I should be. I didn't wait for her reply. I stepped out into the sunlight, letters in hand, breath steady. The drive back felt different. Lighter, somehow. Like something heavy had been unlatched from my ribs. When I reached the little place I now called home, tucked behind the wild garden and the crooked gate, I sat on the porch swing and laid the letters on my lap. I didn't need them to understand. Not anymore. I read them to myself out loud, one by one, like stories I'd tell a child before bed. My voice was strong. Clear. Whole. And for the first time in a long while, I felt heard.